So thanks everyone for coming today. I have a lot of slides, so I'm going to just jump right in there. I've separated this into a few different sections first I want to just talk about kind of the prelude, the early years of my life, the first 30 years, and kind of how we got not necessarily to here, but to the first 30 years. So this story of my life kind of started in a small town in Texas, just south of Dallas. And the only really notable thing about the town that I grew up in was actually pretty notable. They were going to have a giant, what was called the superconducting super collider, which was, if you're familiar with CERN, which is that particle accelerator in Switzerland, that was going to be actually in my hometown underneath us. So alas, it didn't happen. We can talk about that story if you are interested, but it didn't happen. Well, they did part of it, but they didn't do the whole thing. They didn't finish it. So how I came to design, I started out probably like a lot of you doing what might be called art, you know, working in school, kind of painting and doing various other things. And in terms of the things that were sort of what you might call design that I was interested in, I think a lot of times when I listen to designers give lectures, they talk about how music was kind of an inroad, like album packaging, et cetera. For me, it was more movies. And I was really interested in the art direction of movies that I grew up with. And there was a particular designer, Sid Mead, who did Blade Runner, he did Tron, he did Elysium, he did some other things. And these were things that were really inspiring to me. And even I didn't know what design was, but I thought, wow, there's people that are actually doing world building here who are kind of crafting cities of the future, et cetera. And I think my first design challenge was actually, you know, I had been doing a lot of like stuff that was just kind of painting in school. And there was a assignment that every year you could do some sort of poster competition at high school, and it would have a theme. And the theme one year was, what's the world's biggest challenge? And prior to that, I had worked very hard on previous years, and I never got any kind of an award. And one year I was just so frustrated with it. I just kind of waited to the last minute and I just handed in this, which was a piece of paper with procrastination written on it. And it actually won. And I was like, what the fuck just happened? Like this, you know, normally I work my ass off and this time I won. And I think it was the first time I realized that there's something else out there that isn't just like rendering of whatever, but there's like something, maybe it has something to do with ideas. You know, it was such an early stage that I didn't really know what to call it. And as I went through kind of my careers, I met a lot of people along the way who really kind of helped me and showed me what design could be. So these are a few of the people, starting with obviously my parents, but a lot of other people along the way. And most pertinent to this talk was probably my first design mentor, which was Lanny Samis, who was my professor here. You probably have heard his name. And he was terrific. It was a really interesting experience. He's a great designer. He's done a lot of great posters and various other things in the past. And there's a lot of stories I could tell, but I think for this particular talk, there was one I wanted to relay, which was that he said to us pretty early in the program, you know, imagine this scenario. You are an illustrator and you're really good at illustrating cats. And everyone loves your work and they call you up and they hire you again and again and again and again. Then after 2 years, everyone is sick as shit of looking at your cats and your career is over. And I was like, what? You know, I was like, what are you talking about? So it really gave me this sense at an early part of my career that you can actually sort of be known for doing something, you can become successful doing something, but if it's just like one thing, then your career like has a sort of trajectory and an end, a logical end to it. And that was a shock to me. And I think it actually ended up really inspiring, which I'll go into in this talk a little bit, how we built our company. So this is, I went through my old portfolio, I fished out a few projects that were kind of not terrible that I could show. So this one on the left was actually the Christmas card for Penn State. It was done with like spray paint. And then the one on the right is Dali's Pizzeria, like Salvador Dali. And then the other project that I thought was kind of interesting was we did film follies, which I don't know if people are familiar with what film follies was, but it's like at the end of the year, you have this performance for graphic design. And I did these posters, which was just about kind of the writing of them, where rather than promoting film follies, we decided to promote people who were going to come speak, who actually weren't people who were going to come speak. So we put these up around the campus. And I think it was not completely effective in terms of promoting, but I think it was kind of a bizarre sort of solution, which I still felt was kind of interesting. And I think it inspired some later work, which we'll go into in a bit. So if you look back on kind of things that I've done in my life, for some reason, I have a knack for doing major steps in my life at times and places that are sort of not the best. You know, moved to New York in 2001, right before 9/11, opened our company right as the economy crashed. And my daughter was born in a hospital in the height of COVID in New York. So things like that. I moved to New York in 2001. I moved to Williamsburg, which is this is Williamsburg, which is a nice area of Brooklyn that I've called home for since I left Penn State. And the kind of things that were going on in design at that time, there was really this major shift where we were coming off the David Carson grunge era of things being very like graphic and messy and things like that. And we were going into the experimental jet set era of things being very restrained. So I was a little bit schizophrenic in that I was kind of connecting to both of these worlds at the time that I was a student and at the time I was coming out, and felt like I had to come up with my own sort of pathway. My first job was with this guy, Alexander Gelman, who was a very serious Russian, and he was doing work like this, which was very minimalistic. So it was also an influence on me, and he did really nice work and was a terrific mentor. So I actually had, I think, 2 design mentors, which is I'm very grateful for. And at the same time, I was introduced to my wife and partner, Stephanie, and we decided to open up a company because at a certain point, we were just kind of dissatisfied with working with agencies and felt like we should do it kind of on our own. So we did that in 2008. And I picked a name, Triborough. There's actually a number of reasons why we came to this name, but for today's purposes, I just added an R and an O for Tibor, which was a designer I liked at the time. No one knows that story. There's other ones, but so anyway, so we started in 2008, and we were doing kind of a mix of things that didn't pay much money, but they were kind of fun, like working with galleries, doing stuff like this, promotionals for exhibitions, album covers for bands like Blonde Redhead, books, lots of publishing, magazines, etc. So nice stuff. But the problem was in 2008, we suddenly hit a wall when we had like the worst financial crisis ever, or in recent memory. And suddenly all that work just disappeared. And as it turned out, I always like to show this slide because I think as a student, you don't really understand the 6 degrees of separation, which can actually lead to work. So we ended up getting, the lifeline for us was a project with Justin Timberlake. And it came through this array of people to get to that project. So Gelman was actually there too, as you see. And we worked for him for 2-3 years, I think about 3 years. And that was kind of our primary client for a while. And we did like everything for this brand. He basically had a fashion brand, which probably you've never heard of, called William Rast. And we did all this various things for them. And it was a great kind of learning experience. But immediately we discovered a problem where we started to have people from other sort of denim brands like his come to us and like, oh, now we want you to work for us. And we felt like, no, we actually, going back to what Lanny said, it's like we don't want to be known for one thing. We don't want to do one kind of client. So this led to kind of creating a list of goals for the company. So I don't have to explain do good work. That was just something we were passionate about, okay? Design for all industries was an idea to kind of make sure that we didn't keep doing the same type of work. Avoid assholes, I don't have to explain to you. Future-proof our careers was, again, like thinking back to what Lanny said, like we need to be doing things. When I graduated, for example, from school, you could be a designer at a newspaper, but those jobs were gone within a few years. You could be a designer of book covers, that still exists, but certain things were like disappearing as I saw. So future-proof your careers so that you can work a long time, and stay small, which was actually the answer to doing all of the things above. So those were the sort of the 5 things we wanted to do. So we were a little bit busy with that one project, but we actually needed to get the word out about the studio. So we had the idea to do some promotional project. We were kind of always looking at the subway map in New York, which is actually the one on the right. The one on the left you may have seen, but that's the older one. And we really hated the one that was existing. And we thought we could just redesign it. So we were thinking about what our spin would be on it, and we realized that the one thing with every subway map is there's multiple colors. And we said, let's do a 1-color subway map. So we started to redraw everything, and it was a really big, it was like a lot of work to do this. And we released it, and it got some publicity, it got on blogs and things like that. We got to meet Massimo Vignelli, who was the original designer of the subway map. And it was really like a great promotional tool for the studio. We did then a wrong color subway map, which is multicolored, but everything is wrong. So that's kind of the idea there, which has all these neon colors that it was printed in. And, this project did get us like a few, like a little bit of people coming to us. It got us a little bit of publicity. And so it really worked in that way for us. Now, one of the things that I think we were really interested in was, what is going to be, okay, if we don't have a style, what is going to be the thing that we go to when we just need to solve problems? And I think we realized we were most interested in typography. So I think typography became the thing that we were sort of, our thing. This is like, I didn't know what typography was when I was in Dallas, when I was growing up, but these are like some things that I sort of sunk in a little bit to my mind. But again, going back to movies, like typography was something I was sort of thinking about in terms of movies, film titles, like how do you feel when you see this title versus this, like completely different personality, so there's something there. It's all words, but there's something else. And like our definition of what is typography, which I think is like a question I'm still trying to answer, but I always think of it as kind of like architecture built with words, is that you're thinking about a space or a building or something like that, and you've got your sort of segmentations or whatever, and typography sort of works the same way. It's like, the headline orients you in a certain way, the body text informs you, and you have to kind of approach it in this sense of like structuring information. Another component is like these questions of macro and micro. In the same way, like if we're going to stick with this architecture thing, in the same way you kind of get a sense of a building, but you can also then look at the details, and you can look at what kind of door handle they use, et cetera. It's the same with type. You have to orient yourself, but then you also have to look at the curves and things like that. And I think another word that we're not so interested in is communication. I think that communication is overrated. I think meaning is actually the word that we're more interested in. It's a little bit more ambiguous, and meaning is a little bit more powerful. It's more about moving someone as opposed to just kind of telling them what to think. So I'm just going to show you like a range of things that we've worked on, just to kind of give you a sense that even when it comes to typography, we are trying different things. We're going for different personalities always. And sometimes it's like hand painted, and sometimes it's very, hard edged or whatever. And, again, hierarchy is important in terms of like how to move your eye around a page. What is the particular feeling when you look at a certain typeface or a certain arrangement. So, even when you just say something like, okay, we're going to focus on type, there's just like a lot of ways you can explore type. And so I think for us, that was kind of a helpful thing. Like, to not be bogged down with the idea of imagery and the sort of issues that might come with that. So again, yeah, so just some examples, and I'll take you through a couple projects as well to kind of explain how we do some of these things. But oh, another thing, we don't show fake work. There's no mock-ups. So like if I show you a billboard, it's a billboard. That's for another time, but I don't like the idea of mock-ups and stuff. We don't show fake stuff. Nine Inch Nails. So example of a project was Everlane came to us. I don't know if you're familiar with this brand, but it's a fashion brand. They came to us before they started, and they basically just had a name. And we were very interested, and it always had been, in this idea of like defining a brand through a typeface, because if you can make a typeface have a certain voice, whenever you see that typeface, you're going to automatically think of the brand. So with Everlane, we were really inspired by kind of old typography, like from the 1800s, 1900s, but also typography from the future, quote unquote, like from 2001: A Space Odyssey, et cetera. And we made this typeface that was very geometric, and basically we sold them on the idea like all of your communications, you can, if you have a distinctive typeface, you can actually remove the logo. The logo is superfluous. If you have the kind of imagery working in a certain way and you have the type that triggers in people's mind, this is the brand Everlane, that's all you need. And they bought into that, and I think it's something that we've tried again and again with a lot of projects, coming up with that specific voice for each project. So we got asked in 2021 to do the memoirs for Paul McCartney, and that kind of led to the question of like, what is a typeface for Paul McCartney? So we knew we wanted to do something customized, and we had been kind of working around many years, like sketching a serif. So we had kind of we're always doing this, so we always have sort of typefaces that are kind of not really finished. And we showed this one, and they were into it. And it's just kind of a serif, you know, but we always start like with the pertinent information. That's like, you know, you try the name in a lot of different typefaces and you see what looks good, and you kind of craft it based on that. So it became kind of a focal point for the entire project of his memoirs to like have a range of sort of custom versions of this typeface for everything. And the project itself was also kind of like a packaging project, because it was 2 volumes, it was 1,000 pages, it was in this big box, and with like embossings and things like that. So there was like a lot to kind of deal with in terms of storytelling and everything like that. But I think really the type is also what kind of tied everything together and gave it its own sort of unique thing. And then we don't resell our typefaces. So what's kind of nice is the client understands that, you know, this is a typeface that exists solely for this project, and then no one else in the world is ever going to be able to use it for anything. So, so I think a lot of times clients really like that as well. So some spreads. And another very different approach, the TDC came to us to do promotions for their competition. So that's the Type Directors Club in New York. And so we had kind of this idea of, like I said, we kind of start different typefaces. A lot of times we don't finish them. So we had a bunch of these orphan typefaces that were just kind of sitting around. And we said, why don't we do something we've never done before, which is just mix these things up together? Because normally when you make a typeface, you want to make sure that the A looks like it needs to fit with the B and the D and all this kind of stuff. But in this case, it's like, well, we're just going to get rid of all that, and we're just going to start mixing these things together in ways. And it gave it kind of this, the goal was to give it a visual language and something that maybe people haven't quite seen before. Hopefully they'll just kind of notice it, you know, because this is like all about promotion. So like these are things that were actually in social media. Let me just take a drink here. On social media, so you want to grab people, you want them to remember what this competition is. But very different from the Paul McCartney. And commercial type came to us. this was a project for them. They're a type foundry, so they're a company that makes typefaces. And so in this case, we weren't designing any typefaces, but they wanted us to design a promotional brochure for their typefaces. And their name was commercial. So we had this kind of stupidly obviously idea of like, let's just do all the stuff based on TV commercials that were like iconic TV commercials. So, so we had all their typefaces. Normally these kind of specimens are a little bit boring, but this one was a little bit more graphic because we really wanted to interpret the commercials as much as we could. So like this was a commercial from Honda. And if you've seen the commercial, what happens is it's like a Rube Goldberg thing where these kind of, all these things, the parts of the car are taken apart and they move. And we just listened to the noise that was made by all the parts. And then we just typed out the sounds of all the noises and then made a typographic presentation based on that. So it was basically like looking at every sort of commercial and trying to figure out how do we create some sort of visualization with type that makes sense for this TV commercial. And in the back of the book, it explains to you like which one is which commercial, but you could also sort of go through and try to guess. This is, I don't know if, I'm sure no one knows this one because this was like from the 80s, but does anyone know what this could be? Very good, yeah. I mean, it's an iconic commercial, so you know, even if it was before your time, people know it. This is your brain on drugs, so very good, nice. I think this one's pretty hard to come up with. So, and then one more thing in this section I want to talk about in terms of type. Sweet Green, I don't know if anyone knows that. If you have Sweet Greens here, I don't know. Sweet Green is this fast casual eatery that's around the country. And they came to us with a problem of, they wanted to put artwork in their various locations. And we sold them on the idea of just doing something only with type. And we sold them on the idea of, you know, they're all about like seasonality of foods and things like that. So we said, why don't we do like a calendar of ingredients? So what you see on the left is a poster, and you see it kind of in the space there. And so all of these are like posters with different ingredients. I should say, none of this is actually real type. This is, in a sense, this is all cut paper. So this was kind of an interesting exercise for us. It's like, rather than be on the computer where we're always trying to make things very precise, we were like taking big pieces of paper and just chopping out type. And then whatever came out, came out. We didn't really do too much manipulation on the computer. So it's just kind of, we got these very organic sort of things happening as we did that. There were some different versions of the posters, like 2-color versions, and yeah, so that was kind of a different project as well. We do on time, okay. And so now I want to talk about a different sort of component of what we do at the company. We do a lot of restaurants. So we had a rule, and our rule was to like work with all different industries and not repeat ourselves and not do the same types of clients, et cetera, et cetera. We only broke that rule when it came to restaurants because we just really enjoyed the experience of doing identities for restaurants. But first, before I show those, I want to talk about kind of something that we've started to talk about in terms of our process. So we have this thing called the intuition bottleneck. And basically it's like designers, a lot of times, a lot of branding agencies, which we compete against, although I think we're a little bit different, but a lot of branding agencies sell clients on the idea of like, hey, we have all this research and, you know, we do all this research, and then it's like, you get an amazing design at the end. And it's like, there's something completely wrong about that fact, because it's like, we also do research and we look at data, et cetera, and things like that. But the point is, there's always has to be this element of a translator in between the data to an actual finished form. Like all those things that I've shown you, like Sweet Green or whatever, there was data that we looked at, but somebody has to say, let's do a calendar, let's cut the type out of paper, et cetera. And usually that's the designer, at least in our case, that's usually we're the ones who are doing that. So the designer is in the middle, and he or she is the bottleneck. It's like, you're the person that like all that data goes in and it gets translated, and and there it goes. It comes out into a form at the end. And this is something that I feel like is just not really recognized, for some reason. And in terms of how it affects work, so this is some more stuff from Sid Mead, like I just want to show with a lot of the stuff for the restaurants that we do, it's far more intuitive. It's with a client like, some of these other brands that I'm going to show, you have to really think about the audience in a big way. You have to think about all the sort of elements that need to be, you have a responsibility to the client. But when it comes to things that are just more visual and more emotional, you can be far more intuitive and just rely on your own intuition. So this is like an early project that we also did around the time of the subway map as a way of promoting ourselves. It was called Triborough Leftovers. And we just took a lot of stuff that was like a failed idea that the client didn't like, and we just kind of threw them all together into a series of posters. And then we released these online, and they got some promotions like on blogs and things like that. It was all done in black and white. And this was also like kind of a fun project for us. It got us noticed, et cetera. But we thought that people would then call us to do this work, and actually no one ever did. So we were wondering if like this kind of very personal work, like where is that going to go? Where are we going to ever get the chance to do that? And the opportunity came when the Standard Hotel came to us to start doing restaurants for them. And we realized with a restaurant, you don't have to be really communicating anything. You have to, okay, you have to have a menu for sure, but in terms of the mood, the logo, et cetera, you don't really have to do it, like do much. Like you just want to get the right mood. And at the time that we first started doing restaurants, the whole restaurant design world was very much about nostalgia. So it was totally bizarre. It was around 2013, 2012. And every restaurant looked kind of like this on the left, and all the branding was kind of like that on the right. And it was all hearkening back to a time that none of us really lived, like 200 years ago or 150 years ago. And we thought that's like totally bizarre, like, and almost perverse, like it's very strange. So our goal with restaurants was to kind of break that cycle and just kind of do design either based on something about where the restaurant was or the time that it launched or whatever, something about the zeitgeist. So the first one we did was for the Standard Hotel, and it was in this building on the left. And so we started researching the area, and there were a lot of poets in the area, beat poets, et cetera. So we decided we would get an old typewriter and just kind of make graphics from that. And so we just were typing things out, like we named it Cafe Standard, then typed that out. And we did these kind of concrete poetry things like the one on the right. And we put the logo as kind of letters in a corner, just kind of disjointed. And it wasn't quite where we wanted to take restaurants, but it was like, it was already kind of breaking this mold of like complete nostalgia. And then they asked us to do another restaurant in the same location. And we did things like these are little matches that are the size of sugar cubes. And these were like bombshell, like we made these, and then they were on Instagram, which Instagram was very young at the time, but people were like Instagramming themselves with little matches, burning their fingers and stuff like that. So like, it was amazing like how people were reacting to that. So we then got asked to do this other restaurant, and it would normally, it was like a Michelin star restaurant, a good chef, and normally you would do something very serious. And we said, no, let's do, like, our logo should look like this. We like drew it. It's sort of like the poster that I did when I was a teenager. Like we did it in 5 seconds. And all your graphics are going to be more like this. We're going to do this kind of painting that's a little bit naive, just kind of blotchy stuff. And it didn't look like anything else that was out there at the time. Now a lot of restaurants look like this, tons of them. But at the time, no one was doing this. And yeah, it was just like not taking itself too seriously. Like, these are the coasters on the left. That's a cow's tongue. And that's like a cow. At the end of the meal, you get a cow's tail, like at your check. And some of these I'm going to go through a little bit quicker, but each restaurant has its own sort of personality, So some stuff, and everything is like, we sit down and we actually paint things, we make the typefaces, it's all crafted in a way that like we're very hands-on. Again, big matches, we're always into kind of big matches. And I think this was the one that really kind of got a lot of people to notice as well too. This was for a restaurant called Sauvage. And what we did was we basically cut up paper. We did paper sculptures, which is what you see on the left. We photographed them, we put them in cut paper. It was a whole process, but it just, the whole goal was to kind of make something that looked hopefully not like something you've necessarily seen before, and certainly not something that you've seen at a restaurant. So I think this is where we started to come to this idea of like, there should be a zeitgeist around it. And then the other thing that came out of this project was an idea of, okay, a lot of people do restaurants. Why do they always just put the logo on things? Like that's kind of boring. So our idea was really to create, in the same way like a fashion designer does a collection, we do like a collection of graphics. And what's nice about a collection of graphics is you can deploy it on all the different little pieces that you would normally make for a restaurant, whether it's cups or coasters or matches, etc. You have in your toolbox like lots of different pieces. This is for the Equinox Hotel. This is like a far more serious restaurant, and so our identity is like far more serious. It's a little bit more buttoned up. It's all about materiality, like kind of chrome silver, and so it's like not my favorite, but it like shows the kind of the range of, you have different clients, you have sort of different aesthetics based on like what sort of atmosphere they want to portray. And the most recent one that we've completed was Jupiter, and this was in the Rockefeller Center. So right there at the skating rink and where they have the big Christmas tree, they asked us to do, so they're doing a restaurant. This is an Italian restaurant. And we were like, it definitely should not look like an Italian restaurant. It should be something else. And we sold them the idea of using zodiac symbols. And we painted these kind of figures, zodiac figures. And again, because you have this kind of collection of images, you can deploy them on across the board on all kinds of things, or you can do a series of postcards with them. And you create a sort of visual language with them. These are matches here. These are the most ridiculously huge matches ever. And yeah, you can kind of deploy these things. Again, matches, yeah, it's like always matches. And then this is the one that's just about to open. It's kind of inspired by 80s, like Studio 54. This is actually more of a bar. And this is the door. Actually, the door looks like this. And then when you go inside, it's gonna be all like glittery mirrors. So this is the identity here. But this is all I have to show you right now, because this is actually not open yet. So that's restaurants. So again, it's like something where we feel like we can really kind of play around and experiment a little bit more. And the last section, I want to talk about designing for icons. And what I mean by that are brands that are just really, really big. So I think one thing that's unique about us as a company, I don't know how we accomplished this, I have no idea, but somehow we were able to always work for kind of big companies, and then also make sure we had plenty of time for like a little restaurant that opens up around the corner. And I think part of the reason we were able to do that was we stayed small, so that gave us the flexibility to say no to certain things. But anyway, when you're working with those big companies, a lot of times people ask like, how can you do it? How do you get to work for them? And how do you deal with these kind of institutions? And I think I came up with this kind of thing that's from this anecdote that I have from my experience. Like, I used to go to Costa Rica a lot with my wife, and one day we were in the rainforest, and it was like a night tour. You're there at night, and everything is looking like this. This is not an actual photo that I took. This is just something I'm trying to explain. So it's like this, right? And then our guide told us, okay, now take your flashlight and put it up to the side of your eyeball, and now look. And then what we saw was this. And we were like, what's that? And he said, that is every single spider that's staring at you right now. And it was like such a like amazing experience. I was like, what? I mean, and it really was, I couldn't, I it was one of the craziest experiences of my life, I thought, because um, it was like opening this door into this other reality, and through such an analog way of like, you know, you didn't scan a QR code or anything and go to a video somewhere. It was like you just held a flashlight to your eye, and suddenly your eye became a portal to identify all the spiders in a rainforest. Like it was just totally bizarre. So kind of unrelated to what I'm about to next tell, but what I thought was interesting is this idea of like you have to discover layers with your clients, possibilities, new possibilities. So when you're dealing with these kind of big companies, you think like, okay, well, they must have everything already because they've been around for 30 years or whatever. But that's not true. They're actually usually missing things. And it's up to you to kind of figure out what they are. So with Marc Jacobs, they came to us, they were looking for, you're probably familiar with Marc Jacobs, but I just threw in some photos. It was a brand that we always wanted to work for. And they're, you know, he's a fun guy, like he has a lot of energy and he has a humor and things like that. And their branding and their packaging specifically was always a little bit kind of quiet like this, like very toned down. And they came to us like out of the blue to do packaging for them, which we were like so thrilled to work on. And we felt like why when your brand is like so fun, like why are you doing this? And this was in February 2020, so we were like just about to hit COVID. And so this is like some examples of Marc Jacobs stuff. And we said, you know, why don't you have color? Because you have color like in your clothing and you have color like everywhere. And so we felt like there's a case to use yellow because of like yellow taxi cabs and things like that. This sort of New York is kind of like a yellow color. So we wanted to use some yellow. And their bags were kind of like, you know, if we want to think of their bags in this kind of way, like their bags were like this, right? So we said, why don't you not have a bag like that? Why don't you take the handle off and that becomes like a shield and you put that on the bag. So now you've got your little bag and it's on top of a huge yellow bag. And now you've got color. And we were able to sell them on the idea of like a neon yellow, which we use neon a lot in our work, but so the neon yellow just really kind of screams at you, which is quite nice, I think. And then the other thing they didn't have was they never had a pattern. So we said, why don't we make a pattern? And so basically we just took their logo and we kind of duplicated it. And that became really the whole system. We have these kind of like embossed little shields of Marc Jacobs on top of yellow packaging. And then we've got the repetitive nature of the kind of pattern. And then from that, you have a kind of a system that can be expanded to like hundreds of different pieces. And now suddenly a brand that's like, I don't know, 35 years old has a lot more things that they can kind of draw from and play around with. So this was like the packaging system. So it was like a long 2-year project of like doing all these various materials for them and getting them kind of done correctly. And then they started using this pattern elsewhere. They started putting it into actual collections as kind of a graphic pattern that could be used on things. And then even things like this where they did again, no fake work. So this is an actual trolley. This is an actual building with projections on it and things like that. So they did this around the world in Paris and in New York and different cities, these things like this to promote the brand. So another example of kind of working with an icon, MoMA, we worked a little bit with MoMA over the years. And in 2019 or 2018, they came to us because they were doing a major expansion of the MoMA. So with MoMA, MoMA is really interesting because, in one way, because if you think of other museums like the Guggenheim, it has a very recognizable building. With MoMA, they actually have 7 buildings that have been built over the course of almost 100 years. And so the buildings are quite disjointed. So they were doing this major expansion. They were kind of rebuilding everything on the inside and kind of merging all these buildings together in a new way. And we said to them, why don't we try to create a graphic for you? Because actually the thing with MoMA is they have not much stuff for them. They have a logo and they have a name, which is like iconic. They have a typeface, which is like a Franklin Gothic version. But they, beyond that, what they always do, which makes perfect sense, is they showcase artwork from artists. So if you look at a MoMA communication, you'll see like, you'll see the logo and you'll see the artwork, etc. But they didn't have a graphic. So we said, why don't you take this, and this is all your 7 buildings, and make this. Make something where all of these are unified into a single graphic. And we can do it like that, but we can also do it like this on the left. We can make it look like a building, like as if you're standing in front of a building. So we started to produce all these materials for them based on this theme where you have this kind of visual graphic that ties everything together. Now, this was always meant to be just like temporary. So this was like a year and a half. They were doing all the materials in this vein. They did like big installations, murals, things like that. And the only fake thing I'm showing here is this, because we said, why don't you do this? This would be amazing. And they agreed, but they're like, come on, we're not going to do that. So unfortunately, that didn't happen. But that would have been amazing. So after working on them with that was kind of the lead up to this new MoMA. And then they came back to us when they were about to open and they said, okay, now could you do a campaign for us? And again, we went back to like, well, what are you missing? And as we looked at their materials, in addition to not having a graphic, generally, they also didn't have a tone of voice, really. And tone of voice, in terms of the writing, like the messaging, I think everyone knows what that means in terms of the tone of voice, but because, and it makes perfect sense, like they want to be very neutral, so they'll talk about, we have this artist coming, this is the name of the exhibition, why should they have any tone of voice? So they should just talk about the artist, of course. So we said, okay, well, why don't you try doing something that's like this? Your inner artist should get out more, or this is a plug for you to unplug. And we were, telling them, just use type, because they're launching a new MoMA. It's like, we don't want to feature any one artist. We want to just get people excited. And we can't do that by just saying a new MoMA. We need something else. So we started to write all these different headlines, and we did like hundreds of them, and we did them for different audiences, different types of people. We were trying to like reach out to different people, like somebody who knows what canon is. So reload the canon might be funny. Somebody else might not find that funny, but maybe they find follow dried paint funny. Solo shows are better with friends, visit a place you can't bookmark, so all these kind of things, like coming up with these kind of different messages that we could use. And actually, it was easier than we thought it was going to be, because there's something about the experience of a museum that there's a lot you can talk about. So it was actually relatively easy to come up with like hundreds of different different things like this. So this is like, they wanted people to buy more prints for their house, but like say it in a way that's shocking, or something like that's maybe a little more interesting. So, and then sometimes they were like really inside jokes, to the extent that, if you're in New York, that there's a New York artist, or you might know that there's a New York artist named Cause, and his name is pronounced like cause, so support a local cause. It's like, you would get that, but if you're a visitor from another country, you might not get that, but that's okay, because it's more about saturating the market with lots of different messages, and hopefully certain people find different things. And then here's some examples of the campaign as it was applied. So they used some of the stuff, but they also got nervous with some of the things. So what they said was, can we also add in quotes from artists? And so therefore, we also got a lot of these quotes from artists, which are cool, but we were like, oh shit, we're not going to get all of our messaging in, but that was okay. It was, they did some of it, so. And then the last project I want to take you through today, and then we can do questions, is Nike came to us exactly like 10 years ago almost, and asked us like, we would like to create a logo for the city of New York. Can you help us with that? And that was like, already seemed like a dream project to us, but it turned out to be also one of our favorites kind of as we worked on it. So they came to us with that kind of brief, and there was nothing else. They just said, we want a logo for the city of New York. And one of the problems that we discovered was, as we thought about this issue, is that there's a lot of representations of New York City in, or NYC in New York already. So if we just do another typeface and it's Nike, it's not going to be Nike because it's just going to be actually something else that's New York. So we were like, how can you do it so that it's actually Nike? And then we sort of came to an aha moment where we were like, oh, could we make Nike NYC? And when we realized that we could do that, that was like, it made it very kind of clear to us, like there's something here. So then we started to explore the idea of, you can make it more do it yourself, because of the nature of this transformation of turning Nike into NYC. You could literally take an old t-shirt and you could just kind of paint over it or do something to it and make it NYC. So it really fused the brand in a way, and oftentimes with the involvement of a consumer or whatever, however you want to call it, an audience or something like that. You can get that person involved. So over the years, Nike then used this identity in all different ways. They do tons of events, as you can imagine. They do tons of events in New York City. So they'll like do things like this truck here on the left. And we took a hat and we ripped off the stitches and we made that hat. And then they later made that hat as an actual product. And they did billboards that animated, and lots of kind of apparel came with that, and repurposing of ads and whatever. So it was really like kind of a fun thing, because they worked with us to come up with to do the concept, but then they also have like tons of agencies that they work with regularly. So in effect, our concept then sort of went out into the world, and other agencies started doing things with it that we had nothing to do with, but that was also kind of cool. And so including things like this, which was a neon sign, which was also kind of fun to see. And that is it. That's my talk. So we have time for questions, which is great. Should I turn on the lights, or you think? Yeah, I can do it.
If you speak loudly, you can just yell your question, or I can give you this mic. So we'd love to hear some questions.
So I'm curious about the process that your company goes through to receive client work. I would love to hear more about that process.
To secure client work, or?
Yes.
We have no process. The work pretty much comes to us. The thing we do nowadays is kind of discern whether or not we want to work with a client. And certainly there's a process in terms of like, well, let me go back. Okay, so what we don't do is we don't like go out in the world and try to secure clients. I found that for myself, it never works. It only works when people come to you, and what they often do nowadays, sometimes they come to us, they're like, you're the only agency we're talking to, we want to work for Triborough, what's your price? But what we also do a lot of times is you're competing with other agencies. So we have plenty of projects where a client will come to us plus 4 or 5 other agencies, and they'll get a price from everybody, they'll get a proposal from everybody. So those are kind of the 2 ways it works. Like either we'll have a client that maybe already knows us and they're like right away want to work for us. And then there's people that we really have to, we have no idea if we're going to get the project, but we have to kind of do a proposal and do pricing and things like that. Yeah. So it's not, I mean, the reason why I showed that slide with Justin Timberlake was just to kind of show how nutty that it works, like in the real world that I found. That's why I don't try to get work, because how can you predict who you might be connected to or like what might come through at a certain time? There's no way to know. So it's better to kind of try, in my opinion, better to try to promote yourself, try to do good work, and hopefully people are going to come to see you and know who you are, and then work is going to come to you. You know, obviously I make it sound easy. It's not easy. It can take years, but you know, for me, it was better than just kind of pounding the pavement and just getting work in. For me, it never worked. I think it works for people, but it doesn't work for me. So.
As somebody who also graduated from Penn State, what would you say your biggest struggle was post-graduation? What would be your greatest piece of advice for us who are currently in graphic design at Penn State that will be graduating soon?
Yeah. Good question. Good question. Well, I mean, the program is going to be slightly different because I I graduated in 2000, so you have all different teachers and stuff. So hard to get to like specifics. I guess as a student in general, God, what is it? What's the best advice? I don't know. I think, you know, one thing is, I think going to your job, whatever job you have or whatever first job you have, like go into with a kind of a positive attitude. You know, I find that like people with positive attitudes tend to do better. We don't do interns right now, but like in the past we had internships. So like attitude was kind of like a major thing. People that are just kind of excited to be there, you know, because believe it or not, like sometimes people come to offices and they're just like not excited. So that's one that's kind of also easy to do. But yeah, I don't know, what's another good advice? You know, I think it's also sort of different for everybody in terms of like, I could give you the advice, like for me, I went right away to a major metropolitan area, New York City, and that opened up a lot of opportunities, but not everybody wants to do that. So, you know, people who are going to go someplace else are going to have kind of a different challenge as well. But I think one of the things that we did, and I talked about it already, was I think it was helpful when we started our own studio to kind of think about ways to promote ourselves. I think nowadays that's actually way easier than it was perhaps at the time. It's easier and it's harder. It's easier because you obviously have tools that are making it easier for you, but it's a little bit harder because everyone's doing that now. Everyone's self-promoting. So around 2008, when we were starting the company, a little bit different. It's like you could identify certain blogs and you could be like, okay, if I could just get on that blog, everyone's going to see it. And believe it or not, that sort of was the reality at the time. And now it's a little more disjointed. So yeah, it's a slightly different system now. Yeah. If I could think of something else, I'll come back to that question. But.
So a lot of the companies you worked for, it seemed like they gave you kind of full reign to basically do whatever you wanted. So do you mostly choose those type of ones that don't have a lot of say in what they particularly want? And my second question is Tribro Design still just you and your wife, or do you have other people working under you?
Yeah, both good questions. I gave you the impression that they just let us do what we want, but that's not usually the case. It is the case with certain clients. For example, the restaurants, that's a real key point for us, is it's like, we're gonna work for you. We usually don't charge them as much. And part of the point is like, we're gonna do something that we feel like is cool and is the right solution for you. And we oftentimes just show them one thing. With the other clients, it really depends. Like sometimes they are very hands-on, like, with Marc Jacobs, for example, we actually, which we didn't know this was going to be the fact, but we actually worked with Marc Jacobs, the man. And when you're working with somebody who's like that, who's very opinionated, it's his brand. I mean, so you can't go in there and like dictate, this is what we're going to do. It's absolutely not. It's like, it's more almost like what he wants to do, but he doesn't know what he wants to do. So you have to kind of, you have to try out lots of different things. So a lot of times that's kind of our solution to kind of working with, you know, if they're willing to just let us do what we want, great, we know how to handle that. But if they're a little bit more, you know, less trusting in that way, then it's about showing them a lot of different options and kind of talking them through it. There's a lot of psychology to it. You know, you learn to kind of hold their hand in a sense and like, talk to them in the right way, sell in ideas. So tomorrow I'm actually going to show in one of the classes some of the presentations that we give to people so that like I'm going to show the Nike NYC. We actually showed multiple concepts to them. And so you kind of see a little bit how we like frame and convince people and things like that. So, and all that stuff that I think, going back to your question, like, I don't think you can really teach that in school. Like, I feel like a lot of it is just kind of street smarts and just kind of being around long enough and doing this long enough. And then you start to figure out, oh, this is this type of person. Maybe if I present this way, maybe it's going to work, but we still have frustrating clients, and I try to make it sound amazing, but there's a lot of problems that happen too. So, and your second question, yeah, it's really just the two of us. We never really grew for some reason. We do sometimes scale up if we have a type of project where it's like, we just need a lot of help on something for a short time. Okay, we have some freelancers or whatever, but we never really had the opportunity to like just get much bigger. And actually it was kind of good for us because we never had this, the people that I know that have agencies like that, they always have to pay, whatever, 20, 30 people salaries. It means they can't be selective. They have to just take in whatever comes in to pay the bills. And so for us, we can be like, yeah, this project doesn't interest us, so we're not going to take it. And we had that advice from a lot of people as we were starting the company, stay small. And so we were like, okay, we'll stay small, so I think it's been okay, okay decision for us.
How do you normally overcome creative roadblocks?
When you can't come up with ideas
Yeah.
and things? Yeah. There's a few things you can do. I think a lot of times, there's something in the brief that's there. There's something in the experience, maybe even that you have with the client, that's going to tip you off. Like a story I sometimes tell is we were working with a gourmet pretzel baker in the city, and we were meeting with him, and he was like there was salt from the pretzels on the table, and then he was like licking his finger and like taking the salt like this. It was kind of disgusting. And we were like, I don't know. And then we were like thinking, what are we going to do with this brand? And then we had the idea like everything was going to be on sort of craft paper, and then we printed like a pattern of salt just on everything. Like there's always salt, like it's snowing salt. And so that was just an idea. It just came from like observing the client and doing something bizarre, slightly bizarre. It's not that bizarre, I guess. But and so it's things like that. And then when you get it's kind of to her question, like when you start a project, you usually get a lot of briefs. You get a lot of descriptions of like what it is that you're trying to do. And there's a lot of times things in there that kind of pique your interest. And like with the Nike is a good example. It's like you just kind of observe the world and you say, gee, there's all these different versions of New York City. Like, do we really want to pollute the world with another one? What if we just go back to the logo? So I think if you try to keep an open mind, there's like these sort of hidden things in there that can kind of tip you off. But one other thing I'll add to this is, I used to teach in the past, and I would usually say, like, don't think of a blank piece of paper as that you have no ideas. The problem with a blank piece of paper is actually you have too many ideas. You don't know where to start. Like, what am I doing? So, and I have that feeling a lot. So the thing is, you want to just do something. Like, even if you just took some paint and you made a splash, or you like drew a line or something, like the moment you do something, you're like, huh, that looks like something. So the worst thing with block is just kind of let it be a block. You have to just like literally cut paper up or do something like, and then usually something comes,
Hi. I have two questions. Would you say New York is like one of the best cities to get into this field, or are there any other cities throughout the US that you'd recommend? And then also, just like a random question, but is your daughter, does she seem to be like very artistic yet, or Like, do her traits align with you and your wife? I'm just curious.
Yeah. New York, definitely great place. I think, to my opinion, the best place in this country in terms of what we do. I mean, I think in general, I like New York in general, but when we're talking about just your career or whatever, I think it's the best place. Now, when I got out of school, I looked at a lot of different cities, actually. I picked New York. I'm glad I did at the time. If I came out of school now, would I still pick New York? I don't know. I think so, but I'm not sure. But yeah, it's definitely good. I think with design, it's good to be in one of these major metropolitan areas. I think if you ended up in wherever, San Francisco, LA, there's tons of studios, whatever, you're gonna have a good time too. You're gonna learn a lot of stuff. So I'm not knocking on any city, just saying I think New York was very instrumental for me in my career. With my daughter, yes, I would like to see her draw more, but she seems to have a talent of some kind. She's only 3, so I'm sort of like still sort of seeing how this works. She's still really young. She has a kind of a talent for like storytelling, which I don't have. She talks a lot. I don't talk a lot, so I don't. It's weird, you know. Kids are weird, but thanks for asking about my daughter. That's kind of cool. No one ever asked that before. So.
This kind of goes along with another question, but what's some things that you know now that you wish you knew as a student?
Yeah. Well, you know, the one thing that comes to mind was actually sort of the advice that Lanny gave me, which I've already went into a lot of detail about, but you know, and I can kind of rearrange it, but like think about it, your career as this thing, you know, if you want to have like a career that's 20, 30 years, whatever, 40 years, think about like how you're going to sustain that, you know, because I think that's not something as a student that, why would you ever think that way? I certainly wouldn't have thought that way, except that Lanny said something like, gee, you could be a super successful illustrator doing cat drawings and then be out of work in 2 years. Like that just was like, really? You know, like that's possible. So I think just having heard that and then also seeing certain industries were dying when I got out of school. So I saw a lot of people losing their jobs. And then I also saw a lot of designers who specialized in something like one of my good friends from Penn State, she specialized in book covers and she's still doing great book covers. But you know, once you're in that world, it's like you can't break out. And I think what students often don't understand is this notion of like, okay, what do I want for the next 20 years? And how would you even know that? Because you're just a student. But like, just start thinking about it. It's not that you need an answer right away, but just have that in your mind, you know, like I need to be thinking a little bit long term. It's not just about, you should think about getting a job next year, but it's not just about that. It's also about what you're going to do in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, or whatever. So, yeah. Not to put more burdens on you, but you know, it's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. Just think about next year. That's good.
So for when you work for bigger companies like Marc Jacobs and Nike, what makes those brands come to you versus I know a lot of them have like a more assigned bigger agency they go to. So what would you say makes them more attracted to work with you and your wife?
Well, like I said, you go through a process generally where they make you do proposals. So for example, specifically with Marc Jacobs, we had what's called a pitch. It was not an unpaid pitch, which we usually would never do, but there was a paid pitch where they give you a little bit of money to multiple different agencies just to see how you might address the problem, you know, that they have. So I think it was maybe 3 agencies that competed. Also with Nike NYC, we had this too. It was also a paid pitch. Also with Paul McCartney. So it's not, so a lot of the projects are like that. And so that already kind of helps because, you know, you can show your work and, you know, oftentimes you're competing with other companies that are also, you know, competitors to us. Like maybe they're better than us even, but at least you show them something and then they can kind of be like, oh yeah, I like that idea. So then it gets you the project. Yeah. But for some of the other ones, like, why do they pick us? I don't know. I mean, it just like, you put your work out there and then people just respond to it. I mean, there's also tons of projects that I'm sure that we never got because people look at our website and they're just like, what's with this website? There's like no text on this website, and then they don't go to us. But we're like, for us, that's the website we like. And so, I think it just sort of works. It just kind of works out. Yeah. I hope that's a good answer.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. But I would just add that, this is a real process in terms of, like, you start a company, we opened in 2008. It's like, you have no work, We had one client at the time, and or maybe two or something. But so the whole process is like just over the years getting word out about you and like people talking about you, et cetera, et cetera. So this is like a build, it takes a long time. So, I also don't want to be here kind of making it seem like as if it's easy. It's not. It takes a while. It takes work. Yeah.
So on the topic of work, in the interim period of when you moved to 7 years, when you moved to New York before founding Triborough, were you sustaining yourself purely off of work in the design industry? Were you able to consistently kind of find work even like before you built the notoriety of having your own studio that allows you to kind of take this very personal approach to your practice?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, what we did was we worked so the first job was with one of my mentors, Gelman, who I worked with him like 3 years, I think. And through that experience, I mean, I don't know how interesting this is, but like, it was kind of a prototype for then what we did, because it was a very small studio. He was much older than me. He was very talented. I was a student, So, but we were so small that I was forced to like do a lot, I was forced to like, because it was such a small studio, to be in the meetings with clients and see everything he's doing, watch everything he's doing, learn everything. And that was like an amazing experience. And it kind of made me love small studios. Then I went out and tried tons of other stuff. I worked at bigger agencies. I worked in magazines for a while. I tried lots of other things. And I was like, I had the most fun when I was back in that environment of like tiny. So then when it was time to do our own thing, I was like, well, we want to go back there. And at a certain point, after kind of working in these agencies, I became to be a little bit of I was not a good employee because I was a pain in the ass for my bosses or whatever. And so I was like, I can't work for anyone anymore. I have to work for myself, and that was a good thing for me, because I like being with the clients and I like the interaction, stuff like that. I don't want there to be a middleman, or something. All right. So yeah, so that's kind of in brief, like I tried a lot of different things, and that's what I would always that's also good advice, which I didn't think to say, like, try lots of different things if it's possible to, when you're getting out of school, work in different environments, because some people I know love this sort of big agency world and they stay there the whole time. But for me, it was like, nah, give me away. That's not what I want. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Everybody's different, so it's whatever you like.
With having created a design company with just you and your wife, how does that work, with obviously it being your wife, working so consistently, like intimately with someone that you are very close with on a personal level, and then having to separate that professionally on the day-to-day?
Yeah, there's no separation. I mean, it becomes this kind of thing where, I mean, on the one hand, it's really good, I think, to be with your partner, spouse, wife. I know actually a lot of couples that start businesses like that. And I think they're very happy with it. And in some ways, it makes a lot of sense, because it's like, it's a person that you already get along with very well. You can spend a lot of time with them, and you can be completely honest with them, which is, I think, actually the key thing, because when you have a sort of another person there who's, it's sort of like, yeah, you don't want to tell them this looks like shit, But when it's, your husband or your wife, you can be like, that looks like shit. And, so you can just be brutally honest, and it actually saves a lot of the sort of trouble of various things. But yeah, it definitely changes the relationship. It definitely becomes something else. It interweaves your business and your personal life, and it's not for everybody. But I actually do know quite a number of design studios that are husband and wife, and they do very well. So like in terms of being happy and successful, et cetera. So yeah, I think it works. Yeah.